Welcome, everyone, to the first EPRI AI and Electric Power Summit. We are so glad that you are with us today. My name is Christine Rivers. I lead EPRI's communication for artificial intelligence, and I'm excited to be your MC and take you through the next 2 days. I want to take just a minute to take you through our virtual platform. The agenda is displaying here next to me. Down below my video display, you see a QR code and a link to the Slido platform where you can ask questions, comments, and provide your input through the second and third panel sessions today. In the 30-minute breaks, we're going to have some from the field project video updates and a couple other short videos on EPRI's AI work. With that, I want to take you right to our first panel discussion. So get ready to take some notes and on some insights to deploy and scale AI. I'm going to turn it over to EPRI Senior Vice President Neil Wilmshurst, who oversees our artificial intelligence research and is going to have a great conversation with executives from NYPA, Bruce Power, the Moonshot Factory, and the World Energy Council. Neil?
Okay, well, thank you, Christine, and welcome everyone to this important event. And this is our kickoff. There's never been a more important time for the energy industry than now. We all know the transformation that's going on. We've all been aware of AI out in the background. And from my perspective, AI's time to deliver really is now. And as I was thinking about this panel, and just for complete clarity, I'm joining you from Scotland, and I think Mike Howard's joining you from Tennessee, and Gil from New York, and Mike Renchek has made it out of Canada for the first time in the pandemic, and he's in North Carolina, I believe. And we have Audrey, I think, from the Bay Area. So we're all over the place joining you. But my kind of thought about AI was my journey to Europe about a week ago in this business trip I'm on. So to go to the UK, you have to fill out a form. The form is all your personal data, your itinerary. You've got to give details of your vaccination status, details of a PCR test, and even the booking reference for the test you're needed in 2 days' time. So then you show up on your flight, you show up immigration in the UK, and you think this is going to be a bureaucratic nightmare. But actually what happens, and this shows you, I think, the power of AI. You show up at a computerized booth, you scan your passport, and they take a photograph of you. Then every other interaction through Heathrow Airport is just based on the photograph of you. As you go through security, as you board your flight, they just scan your face. And what they've done clearly in the background, using AI and other data techniques, they've linked all that information you gave them, all those QR codes that are floating around, and everything gets linked to that picture of your face. So to me, that is just one of those examples about AI is already ubiquitous everywhere. And so, really where we are with this panel is to really get into how we can learn the lessons of AI from these people who've done so much across the industry, what those lessons are and what their insights are. So with that, I'm really going to start looking to the panel to give some kind of early comments. I'll start first with Gil. Gil, CEO of NYPA. You've been one of the leaders in the industry in New York for deploying AI and embracing AI. So can you give some initial perspectives from you on AI and what made you jump into the AI field when you did, and kind of ahead of much of the field?
Thank you, Neil, and thank you for having me, and glad to be with my friends here on the panel. With NYPA, before I start with addressing your question, for those of you who don't know, NYPA is the largest state-owned electric utility in the United States. We produce about 25% of all electricity in New York. We own and operate a third of the transmission system here. So think of us as the backbone and the shock absorber of New York's power system, because we are 80% based hydro. We serve 51 small municipal utilities. We serve large industrial customers for economic development in all government buildings, state and local government buildings in our state. Our journey to digital transformation really started back in 2012. A lot of work we did with EPRI and Enernex on the IntelliGrid framework. And that was the time when computing power is starting to increase, power electronics starting to really come into its own. And we decided that digital transformation is going to be a key to the energy transition. And we wanted to be the first end-to-end digital utility. Fast forward to today, we have installed a lot of sensors at our generation and transmission and substation across the state. We are streaming about 80,000 sensor points as we sit here today. Next year, about 150,000 sensor points. We have digitized the energy systems of about 12,000 government buildings across the state. And working with EPRI, the utilities, and the New York Independent System Operator here in New York, we have digitized the power grid using the technologies of Opal RT and RTPS, which are supercomputers purposely built to build a closed-loop dynamic model of the power system. So we started at 765 kV, and we're now all the way down to 34 kV of the entire grid. So we have embarked in many other aspects of digital transformation. But with all of that data, you ask me, why are we getting into AI and machine learning? Streaming 150,000 sensor points real time, all the time, digitizing, creating digital twins of the energy systems of our about 12,000 public buildings, and digitizing the power system from all of the utilities, the ISO, and all the PMUs that we installed here back in 2009, 2010 during the federal stimulus part of the program at the time. There is no other choice but to do AI and machine learning. There's just a lot of data, from data integrity to slicing and dicing and using that data. There's no choice but to be in the AI and ML field.
Okay, well, thank you, Gil. Looking forward to your kind of comments as we move into discussion. So now moving to Mike Renchek, who from Bruce Power. So Mike, I hear that your son is deep into AI as well. So I'm wondering, did you send him to AI, or did he pull you kicking and screaming towards AI?
No, I think it runs in the family. Yeah, he went to Northwestern and got a master's degree in robotics this past year. So he's working on drones and robots and all kind of things that I hope as we all get older will be able to help us. And
okay, so
go ahead, Neil.
Sorry, Mike. I'm just saying. So, what do you see is your vision for AI at Bruce Power?
Yeah, first of all, Bruce Power, here at Bruce Power, we generate about 30% of the electricity for Ontario. And in that, it's all clean energy. Ontario's electric grid is deeply decarbonized already. So we view our role in that as one not only for today, but for the next decades to come. And being able to make sure that electricity is reliable, resilient, and affordable is key to our mission. We also do something that's probably not well known, in that we make medical isotopes. We make medical isotopes that sterilize about 40% of the once-used medical devices around the world. So anytime you go to the doctor's or dentist's office and you see those little tools in plastic bags that they take out, you need to think about nuclear power, because we're able to sterilize that equipment. And quite frankly, during the pandemic, we were able to sterilize medical equipment in far less time than other measures. So with the bulk quantities, our employees felt real good about being able to do that. We're also making cancer treatments. And right now we power the Gamma Knife, which is a brain tumor treatment. We're about ready to make Lutetium-177, which is a prostate cancer treatment. And we also make breast cancer treatments. And we see that expanding as we put a new system in service. But when I look at artificial intelligence as we go forward, it's really starting not only to look at how the equipment works, but how people work. In our industry, the electric industry, we're able to see a lot of repetitive type activities happen over and over and over again, especially in a nuclear facility where we're doing surveillances and checking things routinely. It's that repetition and that data. For example, at Bruce Power, we're the largest operating nuclear site in the world with 8 reactors. All the reactors are the same. The activities are the same. So we're able to apply artificial intelligence now to be able to replicate and move faster through different types of work activities. As an example, if an operator walks into the plant right now and generates a work request, the work order is automatically generated now for AI that goes off to our maintenance department. And we have AI now starting to assemble schedules and the like. And that's the business processes. On the flip side of that, I agree with Gil. Applying the sensor technology, we already have thousands of sensor points in CANDU reactors, and we're using our predictive analytical techniques now to look for early signs of degradation and potentially keep us in a prevention mode and keep our units online and reliable. And that's why we're such a great choice for Ontario's clean electric grid. We can always be counted on. We're always there 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year.
Okay, well, thanks, Mike. Great passion there around AI. Clearly lots of benefit out there for AI in the future. So now moving to Audrey. Now, Audrey leads the X moonshot for the electric grid. And I'll tell you, I think many of us, Audrey, don't really understand what happens behind the doors of X, let alone exactly what this moonshot electric grid is. So I'm wondering if you can give us some insights to X and also what your kind of vision for AI is.
Great. And it's wonderful to be here, and it's great to see some old friends. X is an organization that's under Alphabet. And it's our focus is really to take a look at where can we look at 10x technological change that has a benefit for billions across the world. And X is a laboratory, and Alphabet has done things like people are familiar with, such as the creation of Waymo self-driving vehicles, Verily, the healthcare and then autonomous drones, Wing. And really, it's the focus is how do we apply AI and machine learning and other tools that Google and Alphabet are well known for, and take them into new industries to really create benefit for billions across the world, and to create the value of using AI, machine learning, advanced computing capabilities throughout almost all of the sectors. My focus, because of my background in the power system, is really on the operations aspect. So it was really great listening to Mike and Gil talk about how AI can be used for better asset management and predictive maintenance. But I'm looking at the world also in terms of the grid, the whole power system itself, because it's a system of systems. And as we know, one of the great challenges right now we're confronting is how do we integrate renewable energy, storage, distributed energy resources in the system, so that not only are we looking at things like managing our assets better, but really looking at capabilities throughout the system so that the entire system can be more efficient and made capable of using distributed resources and clean energy in a way to really capital optimization, productivity, and emissions reduction. But the issue is going to be, and this is something I've discovered, and I can talk a bit more about it in Australia, where we ran the power system, is as we think about the process of decarbonization throughout the world, it is every system has to learn, how am I going to do this? How am I going to integrate this level of renewables? And then the data problem, as Gil and Mike talked about, becomes huge. I mean, when you think about, Gil was talking about 150,000 sensors. When you think about going from roughly 100 or thousands of generators to trillions of devices that are going to be orchestrated in order to optimize the system, you simply can't keep humans in the loop. You can't do that kind of dispatch that we've always done. We have to think about automation. We have to think about machine learning, and we have to think about, really, for each grid, what can we take in AI and machine learning and, frankly, in the cloud, and think about how to transfer learnings throughout the world in a much more efficient way, because we simply can't be in a situation where every grid operator has to create their own use cases and figure it out. We have to look about how do we do learning transfer better. So at X, that's our focus, is really thinking about how do we make the grid smarter, more autonomous? How do we apply AI and machine learning so that we can be in a position to optimize the power system and really think about the process of decarbonization and the operations of a decarbonized system in a way that we know that we'll achieve the outcomes we have to.
Well, thank you, Audrey. And that's a great kind of connection between what Mike said and what Gil said. As we look at this transition of the energy system and the need for everyone to work together, optimizing your nuclear plant's performance, optimizing your generation transmission assets, and actually then looking at the grid. And the grid is going to become so complicated going forward. So now I want to draw Mike Howard into the conversation. Mike Howard's the CEO Emeritus of EPRI and also the Vice Chair of the World Energy Council. So Mike, you get a lot of credit because you're the person who really was the driving force behind EPRI starting this AI initiative, which is really going to be driving to help our stakeholders through this energy transition. But looking at the World Energy Council and its vision towards 2025 and focused on humanizing energy, I wonder, in your role as the Vice Chair of the World Energy Council, have you got any insights, any thoughts about the adoption of AI and the organizational changes that may be needed to help that?
Well, thanks for that question, Neil, and it's great to see everyone here. Most everyone here, I'm sure, knows a fair amount about EPRI, but less about the World Energy Council. Let me just take a minute and kind of explain that. It was actually started almost 100 years ago to bring non-governmental, non-commercial, apolitical energy leaders together to really have a discussion on an impartial, objective, and realistic discussion on the energy transition. Now, remember, this started almost 100 years ago, right after World War I, and its mission is to promote the sustainable supply and use of energy for everybody, no matter where you live or what energy resources you have. And it promotes the global energy transition and really places a high priority on this transition, the fact that it must work to better humanize energy for everyone. EPRI is the U.S. member committee. There are over 100 different national member committees, and the hallmark of the World Energy Council is every 3 years it brings somewhere between 15 and 20,000 attendees together to talk about all of the energy issues that we face. And the next one is going to be in about 13 months. So that's just a little background about the World Energy Council. I would encourage you to go to the website and learn a lot more about it. But to get to your question, Neil, on culture, for an organization to really accept and understand and take advantage of these tools, you really need to build a digital transformed AI power organization. And while the previous speakers have also talked about why, I just want to emphasize that AI is a tool that allows organizations to really analyze vast amount of data to really help make faster, more agile, better decisions, gain insights into how they can improve efficiency and productivity and quality about really every activity of their businesses. Now, I got involved in helping to develop AI tools and applications about 30 years ago, and boy, has it changed. I mean, you look at the computational speeds and the software tools, you now have tremendous access to data that didn't have then, and we also understand better how to use the tools. But how do we incorporate that into an organization and to use AI for really to make a company better at what they do? And I think the one thing that it starts out with is leadership. It requires that the leaders of the organization really promote a culture of inclusion and innovation, with really unrelenting focus, because AI is for most people a new tool, and most people don't understand how it can be applied. And so that leads me to the next thing, and that is the education of AI tools. It requires a broad understanding of what AI can do, and more importantly, what it can't do for the company. It doesn't mean that all employees have to be AI experts, but there has to be some basic understanding of why AI is different than, let's say, statistical analysis or regression analysis, or even different than an expert system. And the broader understanding throughout the organization there is on what AI is all about, the better off the organization will be in helping to move forward. The third thing is data. Data, everybody so far has talked about data. It is really the fuel for AI. But it also requires to develop an AI strategy, including data governance. And I know we talked a lot about this at EPRI, and it is so critically important to start off with how you collect the data, how you preserve the data, how you store the data, and how you protect it, and the governance around it. And then the next is, what is the objectives? What's the impact that you're trying to make? What are the actions that you want to take in terms of understanding how AI can help the business improve operations, develop new products or services, or whatever? And it's to outline exactly what's needed. And then finally, I think this is also a very important one. It's to address any concerns quickly. Now, there are people that think AI is science fiction, and there are people who think AI will eliminate their jobs and so on. And certainly it could realign some jobs, but you don't want those unintended consequences to hang around. And so as part of building the overall culture, make sure that the leaders in the organization address those issues that are impediments to moving forward as quickly as possible. So, in terms of the culture, leadership, number one, creating a broad understanding throughout the organization, address data strategy, understand where you want to go, what are the objectives of using AI, what will AI do, and what will it not do for the organization, and quickly address any concerns. So those are my kind of the key things that, Neil, I wanted to stress.
Well, thanks, Mike. There's a lot in there, a lot to unpack, but you've really brought up the thing about it's so easy just to keep doing the same thing every day. You've got to actually have someone wanting to push the boundaries, want to change things, want to innovate, to actually move these things forward. One of the things I've learned working with people in the AI space is you need some successes to show an organization that AI can make a difference. So now turn to Audrey. And now, Audrey, you've worked in the Australian energy market. You've got regulatory experience in New York. You've worked with PGM and Excel. So you've got a wide background. And now you're at X, obviously working on AI. I wonder, have you got any examples of successes and any surprises that were along the way in the AI field, and any kind of advice you might want to give someone?
Well, certainly, there's lots of successes, and but I want to pick up on where Mike Mike Howard, and talking about culture and what's it going to take for us to get there. So, one of the things that we worked on when I was in Australia, and Australia has some of the fastest growing amounts of rooftop solar across the world. In fact, in some regions of the country, we're up to 40% of rooftop solar. And so last week, for example, in South Australia, rooftop solar supplied 64% of the underlying usage of energy in a region of the country. And so when you think about that, you realize quite suddenly that, frankly, certain things like human behavior, but also cloud cover, can really impact what's going on the grid. And it's happening really quickly. And so the question then becomes, how can we, when we think about that, and we remember talking to my system operator when I was in Australia, and he said, right now in this region of the country, rooftop solar is our largest single generator. When you combine that and the second largest single generator was wind, you have an incredible need to be able to be much better at forecasting than we've ever been in this industry, because you have to simultaneously using weather and different types of climate conditions to forecast demand and forecast supply. And then out of that, figure out not only, what you're going to need for firming, but other types of capabilities you're going to need in the power system around system strength, inertia, frequency management, and reserves. And that, so you kind of sort of think, well, guess what? My forecasting tools that I've been using for the last, umpteen years are just not going to work anymore, because it's too much data, too much information, too much that has to be analyzed. So we spent a great deal of time at AEMO developing forecasting capabilities, working with various vendors to really think about how do we use machine learning AI to be much better at predicting. And really, actually, what we're thinking about is the industry used to talk about forecast accuracy because things were fairly predictable. We kind of knew when people were going to come home, turn on their lights and all that. When weather becomes your largest fuel source and data then is the largest fuel capability that you need in information, you have to think about not just forecast certainty, but actually forecast uncertainty. And thinking about in the uncertainty, then what do you need to maintain for reserves and flexibility, and get that uncertainty to as narrow a bandwidth as you can. So really the surprise is that we can, is how do we actually use AI and ML to think about the world a bit differently, because the problems and challenges of running a decarbonized system are very different than running a traditional and conventional resources. And we have to think about machine learning really as a way of addressing that problem. The other thing, and I'll just add, is the other piece of acceptance. So I was talking to a colleague who was a fighter pilot, and talked about how the tools in sort of airplanes have changed over the years, and it's really pretty much automated. But the challenge is not necessarily that the tools are inaccurate, it was getting the pilots to trust them. So I think, to Mike's point, one of the things that we're going to have to think about is in this industry is that we are naturally and rightfully conservative because of the importance of what we do. But that may mean, rather than being risk adverse, because we're not ready to adopt technology where it needs it, we're actually creating risk because we're not keeping up with what needs to happen. And so it's how do you change the culture to drive innovation, to allow rapid prototyping, allow fast fails, so that we can learn quickly. Because otherwise, what I fear is that we're just not going to keep up, and the challenges are too significant. So to me, starting with culture, understanding the culture of innovation, how do we as leaders support that? Because it means not accepting failure as failure, but accepting failure as a learning. And then understanding that AI and ML is going to help us solve a very different problem than we thought we had, because the world will change with the transition grid.
Well, thank you, Audrey. And I've got to congratulate the panel at this point. We are absolutely exactly on schedule. So thank you very much for that, everyone. So now, moving to Gil. We were talking earlier about a good friend of both of us, Tom Siebel, who's the CEO of C3 AI. Tom's working with NIPA, and he's obviously, as many people know, done a lot of work with NL. And we're lucky to have a conversation with Tom tomorrow to give us some of his insights. But one of the things I've learned from Tom is that you can have the best AI solutions, the best AI vision, but you need to change the culture of the organization and the processes in order to kind of maximize those benefits. And really, Audrey teed this up very nicely. So thank you, Audrey. Did you have any experiences in NIPA, Gil, with the kind of culture and the processes, any challenges that you saw there with AI?
Oh, absolutely. Not just AI, but digital transformation in general. It's much about change management as technology and technology transformation. So we have been really getting it in our DNA, as Mike Howard said, because you really have to have a different mindset when you want to go through a digital transformation. In fact, on the asset management side, we had to go through an ISO 55001 certification. We're the only utility in North America certified under ISO 55001, and that's kind of like the underlying DNA for that. Now with Tom Siebel and C3 IoT, they are our partners in digitizing those 12,000 state and local government buildings across the state. And so, you really need AI with all of that data, smart meters, sub meters, BMS information, where there are BMS systems, to make sure the data is accurate. So data cleansing, plugging holes, removing anomalies, that's going to be important for predicting. Now we can tell customers what's their forecasted demand and consumption over the next 2 weeks, and for setting goals and doing measurement and verification. So those are great applications and great partnership that we have with C3 IoT. On the utility operations side, we have a partnership with GE, and largely the system that we have is physics-based. It's a physics-based asset health, asset performance management system. And now we're starting to integrate AI, which is just the other side of the coin, trying to solve the same problems. So we're looking at drone, image analysis for drones, working very closely with EPRI. Infrared cameras, analyzing all the data on substation and infrared cameras, voice assistant. So those are AI ML based technologies. We're working very closely with EPRI and some other utilities in a tailored collaboration basis, and also fault detection, fault inspection and fault detection, especially for submarine cables, whether AC or HVDC. We're using AI and machine learning on those. And I don't want to break the news here, but as I've mentioned, we have this Advanced Grid Innovation Lab for Energy. This is the dynamic closed loop model of the entire power system in New York, built by all the utilities, the New York ISO, and NIPA and EPRI. We're talking to Audrey and her team to figure out, okay, with all of that data, how do we develop better optimization routines, visualization tools, and next generation EMS, next generation ADMS, next generation DERMS, because now we have all the data that is real-time, dynamic, closed-loop model where you can do hardware in the loop and software in the loop testing.
Okay, well, thank you very much for that, Gil. So, Mike Renchek, in July, Bruce Power, you issued your vision for the future. I think it was the next 50 years for what your vision is for Bruce Power. And it's such a big part of the power system in Ontario. And clearly innovation, AI is part of that. So one of the things you've touched on already is predictive maintenance, learning all the lessons from the equipment around all those 8 units. So what were some of the major steps you had to take in order to actually roll it out and implement it across that huge site you have there up in Bruce?
Yeah, thanks, Neil. We have a focus on affordability here at Bruce Power. When we look at our Canadian grid, being able to keep power prices low really are impactful for people. You see, we already have a deeply decarbonized grid in Ontario. If you believe that 50 grams per kilowatt is deep decarbonization, Ontario's grid's at 35 grams per kilowatt hour. When you look at that, it can do some comparisons around the world. You'll see Germany about 500 grams. You'll see California about 135 grams. And quite frankly, their cost of electricity is upwards of 30 cents a kilowatt hour on average, where we're sitting at about 13.5 cents. So, our ability to be able to keep running and running well means we're holding the price of power down in Ontario. And we do that through improved performance. In fact, we have a plant that ran 800 continuous days. Our Bruce A facility's been over 1,000 days online continuous, and we can swing our loads 30% in 5 minutes. So being able to be flexible, being able to supply that low-cost power, really important for Ontarians. And our grid's made up of 60% nuclear, 25% hydro. We have about 8% renewables backed up by another 10% gas, and quite frankly, a really effective and clean grid. So when we look at artificial intelligence, we're always looking at it from an affordability perspective of the customer. How do we keep their prices low? And it's really a simple equation. By keeping our plants online full time all the time really helps keep that power price anchored. So as we look forward to AI, we're looking at how we can make sure that our predictive models are set up through our plants. We have 8 units, all about the same, with a lot of repetitive tasks, as I talked about earlier. That artificial intelligence is able to auto-generate work orders, auto-generate schedules, really look at predictive measures of equipment performance and start to give us early signals so that we can get out and do maintenance and keep the units functioning at very high levels. And I think artificial intelligence from that aspect will help us branch into hydrogen production so we can make green hydrogen likely way cheaper than everybody else because of our power source. And as we look to the future for the next 50 years, it's going to be this transformation and this ability to make not just electricity or medical isotopes in our case, but how do we participate in creating really that energy transition, that clean fuel economy? We can bulk make hydrogen, I think, a lot cheaper than many other folks. And as we look at our next 50 years, we'll be in this space for sure as the energy transition continues. And I think artificial intelligence, when you start to have that kind of dependence on a stable, steady, reliable electricity grid and fuel source, AI will participate in that in a large way in terms of predictive learning, in terms of prevention and preemptive work structures so that we can continue to focus on affordability.
All right. Thanks, Mike. And now, Mike Howard, so you actually have a unique perspective here, both from the World Energy Council, looking across the world, and when you're at EPRI, looking across multiple stakeholders. We've heard, I think, everyone talk about the need for innovation, the need to push boundaries, the need to do things differently. And one thing I've learned from talking to many AI practitioners around the world is that not every country is embracing AI the same way, the same speed, the same openness. Have you seen any countries that you think are more innovative, more kind of open to changing the way they work, and any observations you may have around that?
You're right, Neil. It does vary throughout the world. There are some countries that are far ahead of others. I think that in general, all countries are extremely interested in AI. and some are able to contribute to the scientific literature in more advanced ways than others. But let me just give you a few examples. And some of this comes from the work that the World Energy Council has done, some just my own observations from traveling, and also from the Oxford Insights. They publish the AI Readiness Index each year. And a couple of things they found. One is that the U.S. produces the highest number, and this is important, hybrid academic corporation co-authored peer-reviewed papers. Now, the reason that's important, this hybrid academic corporation peer-reviewed papers, is by academic and companies working together, then you can help really accelerate the public-private sector innovations. And the U.S. is clearly the lead in that. All you have to do is just look at the work going on in Silicon Valley and some of the big companies there, including Google. But also another way to look at what's occurring globally is just the general peer-reviewed AI publications. There are thousands and thousands of papers that are peer-reviewed, published each year. And East Asia and the Pacific area has the largest number of peer-reviewed papers and has since 2004, followed by Europe, Central Asia, and then North America. The other way to look at this is through private investment. And clearly the U.S. remains the lead there in terms of private investment in AI companies. And I think last year, something like in the U.S. was $24 billion was invested. This is followed by China and the UK. But the one thing that also stands out in those countries that are really leading in terms of the innovation in AI is that the government emphasizes and takes a lead in developing a well-defined AI strategy and promotes the academic corporation initiatives around AI. The other thing that some of the leading countries do is place a high priority on the importance of computational R&D, including high-speed data analysis, which includes both software and hardware. So when you find those combinations, government focus on an AI strategy supported with a focus on high-speed computation, software development, and so on, you usually find those countries are the leaders in the AI space.
All right. Well, thank you, Mike. And so now we're heading towards the kind of the final lap of this panel. So thank you to all the panelists. I think what you've really showed is there is tremendous potential for AI. AI has had a number of false starts over the years, but actually AI is starting to deliver. As I said in my tee-up, AI is everywhere. It touches our lives every day now, even if we don't realize it. And you've really highlighted some of the opportunities, some of the things that are being done now. But as we look at this crucial next decade or two heading towards 2050, and I'm sat here very close to Glasgow in Scotland, where COP26 will be, and we're all thinking about what does this transition look like. So back to Mike Renchek, you've made great strides at Bruce Power. But where do you see Bruce Power in, say, 5 years? What's the world going to look like at Bruce Power compared to today?
Yeah, thanks, Neil. When I look 5 years down the road, and really down the road a ways, is in terms of our operations, but also in types of products that we make, I see AI as taking a larger role in helping us become more efficient. So much so that we believe in this, that we've created something called the Nuclear Innovation Institute locally. We're a very rural company in a rural area. Our big towns are about 14,000 people in the area. In that institute, we're teaching Python and R language programming to hundreds of grade school and middle school children. So we believe it's going to be such a part of their future that not only 5 years from now, but 10 years from now, even to get to work at a company like Bruce Power, you'll have to have that background and that understanding, because it will be applied to all of our business systems, our financial accounting systems, our work management systems, how we generate energy, how we generate isotopes. And then also, I think as it continues to transform society, we'll see that move further into robotics and automation of not just cars, right, but many things in day-to-day life. And I think that's where the job opportunities will be in this clean energy transition, as we all look forward to a grid that's more functional and capable, but at the same time affordable. And I think when you look at the cost structure, that AI is going to have to play a key role in keeping prices down and also improving reliability.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Mike. And now moving on to the next Mike Howard. Mike, you've touched on this a little bit, and, you taught me a lot in your time at EPRI, and it's really around the power of collaboration. And you touched on it already in your comments about different countries doing different things. So this whole energy transition, the whole world is going to come together, hopefully in a few weeks in Glasgow, and make commitments to around this climate change challenge. What do you think the opportunities and challenges around collaboration are on AI? Are there anything we can do to actually increase that collaboration across boundaries?
Oh, so I think that it's hard to separate AI from collaboration. As I look out over the next 5 to 10 years, the work of what EPRI is doing is absolutely fantastic. They're focused on trying to better understand the best fit various applications for AI. And through that collaboration with the industry globally, is also going to understand what doesn't work. I mean, AI is a tool. It's an important tool. But there are some applications where just regression analysis and statistical analysis will work better. And so a big part of what EPRI can do is to better understand what works, what doesn't, and provide several examples of successful implementation. And so that collaboration with universities, with utility companies around the world, and so on, are going to be really, really important. The other thing that I think EPRI could make a huge difference is a little bit more academic, and that is that AI, unfortunately, has difficulty in interpretability. In other words, it gives an answer, but it has difficulty in figuring out why. And there's a lot of research working on it. And I think EPRI incorporating that into understanding it's not just an output, but why is that output what it is, can make a huge difference in this overall field. So EPRI, global collaboration, AI is the future, and I think it's going to look totally different when we got 5 to 10 years.
Well, thank you, Mike. And Gil, I'm going to change it just a little bit here. You've done a lot at NIPA already. You've got many kind of things running. Where do you think, which items are going to make the most impact? And are there things you might have chosen to done differently? Knowing now what you know today, what would you have done different maybe? What are going to have the most impact going forward?
Well, the most impact that we have so far is in asset management. We're already saving a lot of money just by better management of the health of our assets, power plant, substation, transmission system. We're also so much better in knowing where to put our capital and O&M dollars because of all the analytical information that we're getting from our digital transformation. I think going forward, as Audrey said, there needs to be really a step change, a big step change in how do we orchestrate the integrated energy network of the future. And we need to think about our EMS on the bulk system, our distribution management system, our distributed energy resource management systems, and how they are going to all work together in a different way and in a faster way, in a more agile way. And that's the one that I hope we had worked on that a lot earlier. But we did have this power of collaboration of all the utilities here, EPRI, the New York ISO, in building this dynamic closed loop model of the power system here in New York. Now we're ready to embark on that really step change, significant change that is needed to manage this decarbonization while maintaining reliability and resiliency and cost effectiveness or affordability of the grid.
Okay, thanks, Gil. And now finally, Audrey, you've got tremendous experience from your previous roles, and now we find you sat at X, where you're looking at this new electric grid moonshot. So it's probably back to the question I asked Mike Renchek, really. Where do you see this moonshot in 10 years' time? And what does the world look like as we get back together on this panel and we talk about where we are with the grid and the moonshot?
So I think that one of the things that we have to recognize in our industry is the profound responsibility we have to rapidly look at how we can decarbonize power systems around the world. I mean, fundamentally, we talk about 2050 as if we have until 2050. We don't have until 2050. We actually have to decarbonize the power system in the next 10 to 15 years because we can't decarbonize economies until we decarbonize power. And so it's all going to happen very quickly. What I'm looking at, and with the moonshot, and we talked about what moonshots are, but it's also about what moonshots are, how we approach them. And it is through collaboration because, like all moonshots, it's that complicated, that important, that it requires multiple parties at the table. So, for us, we've announced that we're partnering with utilities in the US, AES. We're working with the Coordinador Nacional in Chile. Yesterday, we announced our virtualization project with Vector in New Zealand. And as Gil mentioned, we are working also with NYPA and saying, how can we use what Gil has done and help New York move forward? These aren't separate projects. Actually, what they are joint learnings so that we can all learn together as we think about these things, because the grid fundamentally, whether it's 60 hertz or 50 hertz, whether it's highly meshed or distributed, it's the physics. But what we all need to recognize is that we had 100 or so years learning how to manage power systems with large power generators that we got to know very well. What we've never done in this industry is manage the power system depending on renewables and storage and other capabilities, which, in Australia, what we learned is that we were able to drive price down as we use these resources more efficiently. And so what we have to think about as an industry, and what my vision is in the next 10 years, is that we're able to create these virtualizations. We're able to do fast learnings across the world in various systems. We're not going to have the capabilities internationally to develop at the level that we have to in terms of how many people we would need. So how do we use machine learning and AI so that we can do more intuitive and get more people on board in the sector? And how do we make sure that the learnings in New York, to the extent they're applicable in New Zealand, can be used? And so it's a very different approach to the system. And we have to think as an industry, how do we think about things differently? And I applaud the work of EPRI and everybody here, because it's that leading. And, at X, what we do is we try to find folks who sort of say, I see that future and I want to work with you towards that, because we have a fundamental responsibility, frankly, to the generations that follow us to make sure that we're doing everything in our capability to get there as soon as we can. So that's, in 10 years, what I'm hoping is that what we're doing, this conversation is saying, remember when we thought that was innovative? That's not innovative. That's just the way we are.
Well, thank you, Audrey. And you bring up a really good point just as we round this out. We all talk about 2050, but you're absolutely right. It's the investments in the next decade are going to determine what those generating assets are when we get to 2040, 2050. So the time frame really is short. But as I've said on a number of occasions, AI is already out there, is already being used. It's real. And I think, again, you've closed the loop really well on the need for collaboration, which Mike and others brought up. There's no individual can do this. The whole industry has to work together to collaborate and actually get this across the line as fast as we can, get those benefits. So I think this has been a fantastic panel to kick these 2 days of the AI Summit off. I want to thank each of you. Every time you have a panel, it's an element of calling in favors. I hope you'll still pick the telephone up for me after this, but I really want to thank you for your insights. Thank you for such a great start to this 2 days on the AI Summit. So thank you very much, everyone, and I hope the attendees have got as much out of it as I have. So back to you, Christine.
Thank you, Neil. What a great opening conversation. I heard a lot of powerful takeaways. AI deployment utilities is going to take more than just a proven technology. It's going to take utility top-down, bottom-up cultural buy-in, fast fails, a culture of innovation, joint learnings, and a commitment to recognizing that the digital transformation can only happen with a strategy and change management to deploy and scale effectively. Okay, we're about to go into our first break. I invite you to stay with us and be inspired by a video update on ongoing research to use AI to accelerate distribution and transmission inspections with drones. So I'll see you in 30 minutes and enjoy our first video.
Currently, utilities collect millions of images each year of transmission and distribution assets. So the ability to automate that process would save time, cost, as well as help to provide a more objective result for analyzing the images. Through the use of drones, the utility's ability to gather vast numbers of images has outpaced their ability to analyze those images.
As a part of routine inspection programs, utilities collect all kinds of imagery of their structures, multiple perspectives, different angles, different resolutions, a lot of times resulting in thousands to millions of images. In terms of the number of images, it's accelerating greatly. The advancement of drones, new cameras and technologies are really making this image review task a problem that humans are having trouble keeping up with. As an example, one flight we did yesterday was a 10-minute automated flight for one structure, but it resulted in 200 images. Right-of-way patrols can be quick flybys that may result in 10 to 20 photos per kilometer, whereas comprehensive inspections could result in 50 to 200 photos per structure. And utilities only get value by taking that raw information and turning it into an inspection report. So that review task can take hours, and it has a cost component to it. So what we're trying to do is leverage AI and machine learning to automate that process while having a really good operational quality.
At Duke Energy, we have transmission assets in 6 states, and in terms of number of structures, we have about 325,000 poles and 50 to 55,000 lattice towers. To estimate the number of fixtures, it's probably measured in the thousands or tens of thousands for sure. We're beginning to get into this sphere more as technology changes. The number increases every year. Historically, as technology's kind of evolved, it's been new. We're beginning to evolve in the GIS space with our assets a little bit more. Historically, they've existed in a host of different places. There's no one central area. So trying to get it to where everyone can view it is particularly important to us, because one group can leverage it in one way and then another in a totally different way. In terms of drone imagery, it's really changing the game in terms of the number of images that we capture. You're able to capture a lot more high-resolution photos and see a lot more detail than we previously could. And so as a result of that, you're taking significantly more pictures per structure. And dealing with that data is a challenge that we have to address. In terms of AI, we're exploring a few different technologies inside of transmission. We are beginning to look into some pilots with machine learning for processing images and identifying objects as well as defects, and then also trying to understand the AI in terms of the capture philosophy, which is part of what we're doing today. On this project with EPRI, we are a partner in this program to look at how automated drone flights can help enhance the data collection process in terms of can we identify the defects and the objects that we're interested in, and then do it in a consistent manner that can then be hopefully leveraged into some sort of AI processing server would be the eventual goal. In terms of what we're looking to achieve in an end state goal, the ideal solution would be no matter how much data we collect, we have an efficient AI algorithm to process it and then deliver that into workable work orders. And that will take quite a while to do, but this is, one step along the way in terms of understanding how we begin to build that framework. The project here at New Hill is looking at several different approaches to automated drone flights. We're looking at different ways that you can capture imagery on a structure with a pre-planned route, and there's been a host of different technologies that have been demonstrated in terms of approaches to doing that.
We're really looking at how to collect the right images to perform a high-quality inspection. And we're trying to do that in a unique way where we're leveraging drones, but we're also trying to automate that data collection. And we're doing that to improve efficiency and reduce costs to deploy these technologies. Some of the information that we capture here, though, can be used to train some of these AI models that maybe live on these drones in one day, where you can identify what are the right perspectives in order to do that comprehensive inspection of the structure. The project goal for using AI for automation and inspection is really just to reduce the cost and the time to take that data that you collected in the field and again turn it into actual information. The barriers that I see in industry right now is that where we want to get is a little bit far away than where we are today. And the only way for us to get there as an industry is to begin working together and pooling some of our data sets to help train these models to an acceptable level of performance. If you think about all of the different types of components and their different failure modes, any kind of AI model has got to be really robust and complex to handle that many variables. And then when you throw in things like different lighting conditions and the different resolutions of imagery that you're getting, it's a very difficult problem to solve. We're trying to address some of the fundamental gaps that exist in industry today. We're trying to collect, pool, sanitize, and anonymize imagery so that private industry, utilities, academia can use that to build models that utilities can deploy to automate this inspection process. A few additional steps in that include identifying labeling guidance. So what are all the terms and relationships of some of these objects and their defects, as well as hosting tests and crowdsourcing some of the model development. A lot of what I see in industry is that there's pilots going on, and that's great. Individual companies partnering with individual utilities. But this is an opportunity where a lot of our infrastructure looks exactly the same, and a lot of our defects in one service territory are very similar to the other. What EPRI is trying to do is pull those companies together so that we can, again, accelerate the development of these systems so that they're actually usable. We work in a critical infrastructure industry, and one false negative could result in a failure of an asset, which could cause a power outage. That's a very high bar for these computer-based systems to meet. The end value of all this collaboration is that it just reduces the timeline of getting to where we want.
So there are really two benefits that artificial intelligence can bring to the analysis of transmission and distribution assets. One is in the short term, looking at being able to reduce the load on the staff, And in the long term, we're looking to develop automated workflows for this to automate many of the processes. EPRI is in a unique position because we sit between universities and academia with the utilities and AI vendors. And we're able to provide an independent third-party objective analysis of the results to help benchmark and evaluate how these algorithms perform and how they can be adapted and scaled for enterprise-wide adoption.
So in terms of scaling this project, it's something of interest for us. Putting it into execution, it will take some time to leverage aerial inspections in a way that gives us a clearer vision of what's happening on our system. So we're really interested to see what the results are and then see how applicable that is to what our goals are.
Some of the workflows that EPRI is building to leverage AI for other utility applications, it really just comes down to any type of inspection process that you think can be automated. Can you automate the data collection via drones, and can you automate the data review with artificial intelligence? A lot of what EPRI is doing is kind of foundational. Again, we're not building the end solutions, but we're building the pillars for success, if you would, by data collection, data scrubbing, data labeling, guidance, and then hosting these competitions. We've had a really good opportunity to start in transmission and distribution inspection because we've had historical image data sets for some of our traditional inspection models. That workflow can apply for any utility application that wants to accelerate the development of AI systems.